The tension in courtroom 304 was suffocating as 17-year-old Jamal Washington stood alone at the defendant's table. Laughter rippled through the gallery when he announced he would be representing the tenants of West Side Heights. "Is this some kind of joke?" Attorney Bradley Wilson sneered, his custom suit worth more than everything Jamal owned. "Your Honor, this child can't possibly represent anyone. He should be in school learning algebra, not wasting the court's time." Judge Victoria Harmon peered down from her bench, her expression a mixture of amusement and annoyance. "Young man, this is a court of law, not a high school debate club. Do you honestly believe you can stand against one of the city's top real estate attorneys?" More laughter filled the room. The wealthy developers and their legal team exchanged smug glances. They had already won, or so they thought. What no one in that courtroom knew was that behind Jamal's youthful face and humble clothes lurked one of the most brilliant legal minds the city had ever seen. In just moments, the smirks would fade, the laughter would die, and everyone present would learn a powerful lesson about judging someone by their appearance. But Jamal's journey to this moment began weeks earlier, in the heart of West Side Heights, where hope often struggled against hardship. Before we go any further, we'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or country. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button to join our community of storytellers dedicated to Black voices and experiences. Now back to our story. In the aging apartment complex that had been home for all his 17 years, Jamal Washington walked with purpose through hallways that had raised him. Though young, there was an unmistakable wisdom in his eyes, a quiet determination that seemed out of place on someone so young. "Good morning, Mrs. Parker," Jamal called out, waving to an elderly woman struggling with grocery bags. "Jamal, just the young man I needed to see," she replied, her weathered face breaking into a smile. "They're trying to raise my rent again. That letter you helped me write last time. You think we could do another?" "Of course, Mrs. Parker. I'll stop by this evening," Jamal promised, checking his watch. He was running late for school, but neighbors like Mrs. Parker had no one else to turn to. This was Jamal's routine, school by day, helping neighbors with paperwork and legal questions by evening. No one questioned how a high school senior knew so much about tenant laws or contract disputes. In West Side Heights, help was help, no matter the source. At home that evening, Jamal sat at the kitchen table surrounded by textbooks. The modest two-bedroom apartment was spotless but worn, every item carefully maintained by his mother, Diana Washington. "You eating enough, baby?" Diana asked, setting down a plate beside his books. Her nurse's scrubs were wrinkled from a 12-hour shift, dark circles under her eyes betraying her exhaustion. "I'm good, Mom. You should rest. Isn't this your third double shift this week?" Diana sighed. "Hospital's short-staffed. Besides, we need the overtime with college coming up." She glanced at the scholarship rejection letters Jamal had tucked under his textbook. Despite his perfect GPA, the prestigious law schools he dreamed of remained financially out of reach. Their conversation was interrupted by frantic knocking. Jamal opened the door to find Zoe Bennett, his childhood friend, tears streaming down her face. "They're kicking us out, Jamal. All of us." Zoe thrust a notice into his hands. 30 days to vacate. "My mom's freaking out." Jamal scanned the document, his brow furrowing. "Donovan Properties? Who's that?" "Some big developer. They bought our whole building last month. Now they're saying they need to renovate, but everyone knows they're just going to jack up the rents so none of us can afford to come back." Jamal read through the eviction notice carefully. This doesn't seem right. There are laws protecting tenants in these situations. "Laws?" Zoe's father scoffed from the doorway, having followed his daughter. "Laws don't protect people like us, son. They never have." "Maybe they can," Jamal said quietly, still studying the document. "Let me look into this. There might be something we can do." The next morning, instead of heading to school, Jamal made his way downtown to the gleaming glass offices of Wilson and Associates, one of the city's most prestigious law firms. The receptionist eyed his worn jeans and hoodie with obvious disdain. "Do you have an appointment?" she asked, not bothering to check her computer. "No, ma'am, but I was hoping to speak with someone about a tenant rights case. It's urgent. An entire apartment building is being illegally evicted." The receptionist sighed. Take a seat. Someone will be with you, eventually. 3 hours later, Jamal was finally ushered into a conference room where Bradley Wilson himself sat, impatiently tapping his gold pen against legal papers. I have exactly 5 minutes, Wilson said without looking up. My pro bono quota is filled for the quarter, but Marissa insisted I at least hear you out. Jamal placed Zoe's eviction notice on the table. Sir, Donovan Properties is trying to evict 28 families from the West Side Heights apartments with only 30 days' notice. My research indicates this violates the city's tenant protection ordinance, which requires. Wilson cut him off with a laugh. Your research? How old are you, kid? 16. 17, sir. And what would you know about tenant protection ordinances? Wilson's tone was mocking, his gaze finally lifting to take in Jamal's appearance. Undeterred, Jamal continued. Section 8.76 of the Municipal Code requires 90 days' notice for buildings with more than 10 units, plus relocation assistance if. That's enough, Wilson interrupted, standing abruptly. I don't know what legal shows you've been binging, but the real world doesn't work that way. Donovan Properties is one of our most valued clients, and I can assure you their legal team doesn't make mistakes. Wilson walked to the door, holding it open. Stay in school, kid. Maybe in 10 years, after law school and passing the bar, you can come lecture me about municipal codes. The entire office watched as Jamal was escorted out, whispers and smirks following him to the elevator. His face burned with humiliation, but his resolve only strengthened. Over the next week, the situation at West Side Heights deteriorated. More families received notices, some with even shorter timelines. Jamal spent every free moment at the public library, researching tenant rights and poring over case law on his school laptop. At a community meeting in the building's lobby, residents gathered to share their fears. Many were elderly or single parents. None could afford the costs of sudden relocation. My daughter's in the middle of cancer treatments at City Hospital, one woman explained through tears. We can't move away now, but where will we go? When Jamal tried to speak, suggesting legal options, Mr. Donovan's attorney quickly shut him down. Young man, this is an adult discussion about legal matters. Please let the grown-ups talk. Frustrated but undeterred, Jamal distributed handouts he prepared outlining tenants' rights. Donovan's representatives quickly collected and discarded them. That night, Jamal returned home to find his mother sitting with an unexpected visitor, Dr. Michael Rivera, distinguished in his tweed jacket and glasses. Jamal, Dr. Rivera smiled, rising to shake his hand. I was just telling your mother how impressed we've been with your work in the program. Jamal froze. Dr. Rivera, I didn't expect. The program? Diana asked, confusion evident on her tired face. Dr. Rivera looked between them. The Young Legal Scholars Program at the university. Jamal has been part of our accelerated weekend program for nearly 2 years. Did he not tell you? Diana's eyes widened. Weekend program? Jamal told me he was doing SAT prep classes. The truth spilled out. For 2 years, Jamal had been secretly attending an elite legal training program for gifted high school students. He'd won multiple mock trial competitions and written papers that impressed even veteran attorneys. Dr. Rivera, the program director, had come to discuss Jamal's exceptional performance and future prospects. Jamal consistently demonstrates legal reasoning abilities that surpass many second-year law students, Dr. Rivera explained. His analysis of the Jensen versus City housing discrimination case was so insightful that a colleague of mine, a sitting judge, asked who wrote it. Diana stared at her son in disbelief. Why would you keep this secret from me? Jamal looked down. The program costs money, Mom. I got a scholarship, but you still would have had to pay for transportation, special materials. I didn't want to be another burden. So I worked odd jobs around the neighborhood to cover the expenses. That's where the extra money came from? I thought you were saving for a car. Dr. Rivera cleared his throat. Mrs. Washington, your son has extraordinary potential. He could become one of the finest legal minds of his generation. But right now, he's come to me about a housing crisis in your community, and he's determined to help. Jamal looked up, meeting his mentor's eyes. The West Side Heights evictions. Dr. Rivera, They're violating so many regulations, but no one will listen to me because I'm just a kid. Dr. Rivera nodded thoughtfully. Sometimes being underestimated can be an advantage, Jamal. People reveal more when they think you can't understand. But what can I do? I'm not a lawyer. Wilson made that perfectly clear. Not yet, Dr. Rivera said with a small smile. But there are options. Have you considered the tenant advocacy provision under Municipal Code 5.113? Jamal's eyes widened. The one that allows non-attorneys to represent tenants in specific housing court procedures? Would that actually work? It's rarely invoked, but still valid. It would be challenging, unprecedented even, for someone your age. But if anyone could do it. Dr. Rivera trailed off. Diana watched the exchange, still processing the revelation about her son. Jamal, this sounds dangerous. These developers have money, power, connections. They're counting on people being too afraid or too poor to fight back, Mom. Jamal replied with quiet determination. Someone has to stand up for Zoe's family, for Mrs. Parker, for everyone in our building. Dr. Rivera placed a hand on Jamal's shoulder. If you decide to pursue this, I can offer guidance, though I can't represent you directly due to university policies. But make no mistake, you'll be facing experienced attorneys who won't hesitate to crush you if they can. Jamal looked between his mother and Minter, then at the stack of eviction notices on the table. His decision was already made. When's the first hearing? He asked. Monday morning, Housing Court, Dr. Rivera replied. Are you sure about this? Jamal nodded, a steely resolve settling over his young features. They think I'm just a kid. They're about to learn how wrong they are. If this story resonates with you so far, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue sharing these crucial stories of resilience and justice. Now let's see what happens next. Monday morning arrived with a sense of foreboding. Courtroom 304 buzzed with whispers as tenants from West Side Heights filed in. Many taking time off work they couldn't afford to lose. Mr. Donovan sat confidently at the plaintiff's table, flanked by Bradley Wilson and two junior associates carrying expensive leather briefcases. Jamal stood near the back, dressed in his Sunday best, a slightly too small suit his mother had insisted on buying for the occasion. In his hands, he clutched a worn backpack stuffed with carefully organized research and legal documents. All rise for the Honorable Judge Victoria Harmon, the bailiff announced. Judge Harmon entered, her stern gaze sweeping the courtroom as she took her seat. Donovan Properties versus West Side Heights Tenants Association. Counsel, please identify yourselves for the record. Wilson stood smoothly. Bradley Wilson for the plaintiff. Donovan Properties, Your Honor. His voice carried the easy confidence of someone who had won in this courtroom many times before. When no one rose for the defense, Judge Harmon frowned. Is there no representation for the tenants? The courtroom fell silent. Then, with his heart pounding, Jamal stepped forward. Jamal Washington, Your Honor. I'll be representing the West Side Heights Tenants Association. A ripple of surprised murmurs spread through the courtroom. Wilson turned, his expression shifting from confusion to amusement as he took in Jamal's youth. Your Honor, Wilson began, not bothering to hide his smirk. This is clearly inappropriate. The defendant cannot be represented by a child. Judge Harmon peered down at Jamal over her reading glasses. Young man, are you an attorney? No, Your Honor, but under Municipal Code Section 5.113, a non-attorney may represent tenants in specific housing court proceedings where. Wilson interrupted with a dismissive wave. Your Honor, this is absurd. This is not a school project or mock trial. Real people's lives and valuable property are at stake. The gallery erupted in whispers and chuckles. Several of Donovan's associates didn't bother concealing their laughter. Judge Harmon raised an eyebrow. Mr. Washington, how old are you? 17, Your Honor. 17, she repeated, letting the word hang in the air. And you believe you can effectively advocate against one of the city's top real estate attorneys? Yes, Your Honor, Jamal replied, his voice steadier than he felt. The law doesn't specify an age requirement for tenant advocacy under Section 5.113, only that the representative must be designated by a majority of the affected tenants, which I have been. He held up a document. I have signed statements from 23 of the 28 households. Judge Harmon appeared momentarily taken aback. She extended her hand, and the bailiff brought her the document. This is highly unusual, she said after reviewing the signatures. Mr. Wilson, your response? Wilson cleared his throat. Your Honor, while technically the language of 5.113 doesn't specify an age requirement, surely the court recognizes the absurdity of allowing a high school student to act in this capacity. The intention of the statute clearly presumes an adult with some minimal understanding of legal proceedings. I understand legal proceedings, Your Honor, Jamal interjected. And I would direct the court's attention to Martinez v. Citywide Housing Authority, where Judge Kellerman ruled that the tenant advocacy provision should be interpreted broadly to maximize access to representation for vulnerable communities. The courtroom fell silent again, but this time with surprise rather than mockery. Judge Harmon studied Jamal with newfound curiosity. You've done your homework, Mr. Washington. Nevertheless, I have serious reservations about this arrangement. She tapped her fingers on the bench, considering. I will allow you to proceed today, but I reserve the right to revisit this decision if it becomes clear you're out of your depth. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. Wilson straightened his tie, visibly annoyed but not concerned. Your Honor, in that case, may we proceed? These eviction notices are time-sensitive, and my client has contractors scheduled to begin renovations next month. By all means, Judge Harmon replied. Mr. Wilson, present your case. For the next 40 minutes, Wilson outlined Donovan Properties' position with practiced eloquence. He presented documentation showing the building needed critical upgrades, argued that the 30-day notices were standard procedure, and emphasized Mr. Donovan's generous offer to waive the last month's rent. When Wilson finished, Judge Harmon turned to Jamal. Mr. Washington, your response? Jamal approached the podium, feeling every eye in the courtroom upon him. He took a deep breath. Your Honor, Donovan Properties' eviction notices violate 3 separate tenant protection laws. He pulled out highlighted copies of the municipal code. First, buildings with more than 10 units require 90 days notice, not 30. Second, any renovation-based eviction of a building where over 40% of tenants are low-income requires the landlord to provide relocation assistance of 3 times the monthly rent. Third, tenants must be given right of first refusal to return at comparable rates after renovations. Wilson scoffed. Your Honor, these provisions only apply to rent-controlled buildings, which West Side Heights is not. That's incorrect, Jamal countered without missing a beat. The Tenant Protection Act of 2019 extended these protections to all buildings with more than 15 units, regardless of rent control status. I've highlighted the relevant section for the court. Judge Harmon accepted the document, studying it carefully while Wilson whispered urgently with his associates. The confidence on Wilson's face faltered slightly. Furthermore, Jamal continued, I'd like to present evidence that the critical renovations cited by Donovan Properties are merely a pretext for a complete luxury conversion. Their own filing with the City Planning Department, submitted 3 weeks ago, shows plans not for repairs but for combining units and adding amenities that would price out current residents. He handed over another document, architectural plans that Dr. Rivera had helped him obtain through public records. Judge Harmon frowned as she reviewed the plans. Mr. Wilson, these renovations appear to go well beyond the critical repairs described in your filing. Wilson recovered quickly. Your Honor, my client has every right to improve his property. The market determines appropriate rental rates, not emotional appeals from tenants unwilling to pay fair market value. The law determines the proper procedure for evictions, Jamal countered, and Donovan Properties has failed to follow it. The hearing continued for another hour, with Jamal methodically challenging each of Wilson's arguments. Though clearly inexperienced in courtroom procedure, his command of housing law was undeniable. Even Judge Harmon seemed increasingly impressed. I've heard enough for today, she finally announced. I'll need time to review these documents. We'll reconvene on Thursday at 10 a.m. She fixed Jamal with a pointed look. Mr. Washington, I must say I'm surprised by your preparation, but this is just the beginning. Be ready for a much more rigorous examination next time. As the courtroom emptied, Wilson approached Jamal, his voice low enough that only Jamal could hear. Impressive performance for an amateur, but you're way out of your league, kid. Mr. Donovan doesn't lose. Not ever. You might want to tell your neighbors to start packing. Is that a threat, Mr. Wilson? Jamal asked calmly. Wilson smiled thinly. Just friendly advice. By the way, how's your mother enjoying her job at Memorial Hospital? I hear the nursing supervisor position she applied for just became unexpectedly competitive. Jamal froze. What are you talking about? Small world. Mr. Donovan sits on Memorial's board. Like I said, just friendly advice. Wilson adjusted his cufflinks. Drop this case, Washington. Some fights aren't worth the collateral damage. Before Jamal could respond, Wilson walked away, leaving him stunned in the emptying courtroom. That night, Diana Washington came home in tears. After 3 years of perfect evaluations, she'd suddenly been written up for documentation errors and placed on probation. The nursing supervisor position she'd been promised was given to someone else, someone with connections to the hospital board. It's just a coincidence, Mom, Jamal insisted, not wanting her to know about Wilson's thinly veiled threat. Maybe, Diana replied, unconvinced. But the timing is strange. And my manager mentioned something about not causing trouble right before she handed me the disciplinary notice. The next morning, Jamal arrived at school to find his locker vandalized, the word snitch spray painted across it. In history class, he received a text from Dr. Rivera, need to speak with you urgently. My office. 3 p.m. When Jamal arrived at the university, Dr. Rivera was not alone. The dean of the law school sat beside him, looking grave. Jamal, Dr. Rivera began carefully. The dean has some concerns about your participation in the West Side Heights case. We've received calls, the dean explained, expressing concern that our program is encouraging unqualified students to practice law without a license. I'm not practicing law, Jamal protested. I'm acting as a tenant advocate under Municipal Code 5.113, which is completely legal. Nevertheless, the dean continued, the university cannot appear to endorse this activity. We've been informed that if this continues, certain donations to our scholarship fund might be reconsidered. Dr. Rivera looked pained. They're threatening to pull funding that supports dozens of students like you, Jamal. Who's they? Jamal demanded. The adults exchanged glances. That's not important, the dean said. What matters is that you need to make a choice. Continue with this case, or continue with the Young Legal Scholars Program. We can't support both. As Jamal left the meeting, his phone buzzed with a message from Zoe. Emergency at the building. Come quick. He arrived at West Side Heights to find chaos. Moving trucks lined the street, and several apartments had been forcibly emptied, belongings piled on the sidewalk. Tearful residents clustered around an official-looking document posted in the lobby. They're saying the building's been condemned, Zoe explained, her voice shaking. Something about structural damage making it unsafe. Everyone has to be out by tomorrow. Jamal scanned the condemnation notice. The engineering report had been signed just hours ago by a firm owned by Donovan Properties. This is fake, he whispered. They're trying to circumvent the court hearing. As realization dawned, Jamal felt a cold certainty settle over him. This wasn't just about real estate anymore. This was about power, the power to crush anyone who dared to challenge the system. He pulled out his phone to call Dr. Rivera, only to discover that the evidence files he'd carefully prepared for Thursday's hearing had been deleted from his cloud storage. His backup flash drive, which had been in his locker at school, was missing. They were systematically dismantling his case, his support system, and his evidence. Everything was falling apart. But what Donovan and Wilson didn't know, what no one knew, was that Jamal Washington had one more card to play. One that would shock everyone in that courtroom on Thursday morning. Thursday morning arrived with an air of finality. The courtroom was packed, not just with West Side Heights residents, but curious attorneys and courthouse staff who had heard rumors about the teenage advocate taking on Bradley Wilson. Jamal sat alone at the defense table, no notes or files before him. He appeared oddly calm despite having lost his evidence, his mentor's support, and potentially his mother's job. When Judge Harmon entered, her expression was severe. "I understand there's been a development in this case," she began. "Mr. Wilson?" Wilson rose confidently. "Yes, Your Honor. The case is effectively moot. The building in question has been condemned by city inspectors due to serious structural deficiencies." He presented the condemnation report with a flourish. "The residents must vacate for their own safety. It's unfortunate, but public safety must come first." Judge Harmon turned to Jamal. "Mr. Washington, do you have a response to this development?" "I do, Your Honor," Jamal said, rising slowly. "May I approach?" Judge Harmon nodded, surprised by his composure. Jamal walked forward, removing a single folded document from his pocket. "Your Honor, I'd like to submit this report from the city's chief building inspector, dated this morning at 7 a.m. He personally inspected West Side Heights and found no structural issues warranting condemnation." Wilson's head snapped up. "That's impossible. We have the official." "What Mr. Wilson has," Jamal interrupted, "is a fraudulent document signed by an engineer whose firm is a subsidiary of Donovan Properties. The actual city inspector's report invalidates the condemnation order, effective immediately." Judge Harmon's eyebrows rose as she compared the documents. "Mr. Wilson, can you explain this discrepancy?" For the first time, Wilson appeared flustered. "Your Honor, I was simply provided this document by my client. I had no reason to question its authenticity." "Perhaps you should have," Jamal said, then turned back to the judge. "Your Honor, I'm prepared to demonstrate that this fraudulent condemnation is part of a pattern of deceptive and illegal practices by Donovan Properties." "Proceed," Judge Harmon said, her full attention now on Jamal. What happened next astonished everyone in the courtroom. Without notes or references, Jamal launched into a masterful legal presentation. He cited case law from memory, referenced obscure housing statutes with precision, and methodically exposed the true nature of Donovan's renovation plans. In Hernandez versus Landmark Properties, the Supreme Court established that deceptive practices designed to circumvent tenant protections constitute a form of constructive eviction, Jamal stated with the confidence of a seasoned attorney. Further, in Johnson versus Metropolitan Housing, the court held that attempted evasion of judicial process through fraudulent condemnation represents an actionable tort against both landlord and counsel if the latter had reasonable cause to suspect fraud. Wilson paled. Some of these cases were so specialized that even he wasn't familiar with all of them. "Your Honor," Jamal continued, "I would like to direct the court's attention to Donovan Properties' financial filings from the past quarter, which reveal they've secured a $50 million investment contingent upon converting West Side Heights to luxury condominiums by the end of this year." He produced another document. "This is why they couldn't afford to wait the required 90 days. Their financing agreement has a strict timeline." Judge Harmon accepted the document, visibly impressed. "Mr. Washington, how did you obtain this information?" "Public records, Your Honor. SEC filings are accessible to anyone who knows where to look." One of Wilson's junior associates whispered urgently in his ear. Wilson's face turned ashen. "There's more, Your Honor," Jamal continued. "I have evidence that Mr. Wilson and Donovan Properties have engaged in witness intimidation and interference." A murmur swept through the courtroom. Jamal described the threats against his mother's job, the university funding pressure, and the destruction of evidence. Dr. Rivera, who had slipped into the back of the courtroom, stood up. "Your Honor, if I may, I can corroborate Mr. Washington's claims about pressure being placed on the university." Judge Harmon's expression hardened. "Mr. Wilson, these are serious allegations." "They're absurd, Your Honor," Wilson sputtered. "The boy is making wild accusations without proof." "I have proof," Jamal interrupted. He pulled out his phone. "I recorded our conversation after Monday's hearing, where Mr. Wilson specifically threatened my mother's employment at Memorial Hospital." Wilson's face drained of color. "That recording would be inadmissible." "In criminal court, perhaps," Jamal countered. "But as you well know, the rules of evidence are more relaxed in housing court proceedings, particularly when demonstrating bad faith actions by the opposing party. See Matthews versus Urban Development, 2018. The courtroom fell into stunned silence. This was not just a teenager who had memorized some laws. This was a legal mind operating at the highest level. "Your Honor," Jamal said, his voice now filled with quiet conviction, "the families of West Side Heights aren't just facing illegal eviction. They're facing a systematic abuse of power and privilege. Mr. Donovan believes his wealth places him above the law. Mr. Wilson believes his prestigious degree and expensive suit give him the right to bully and threaten a 17-year-old and his mother." He paused, looking directly at Wilson. "They were so convinced of my inferiority that they never bothered to ask a simple question. How does a high school student know so much about housing law?" Judge Harmon leaned forward. "Indeed, Mr. Washington. How do you?" Jamal smiled slightly. "Because my father was Martin Washington, the housing rights attorney who drafted many of the tenant protection laws we're discussing today. Before he died 5 years ago, he taught me that the law, when properly wielded, is the great equalizer." Recognition flickered across Judge Harmon's face. "Martin Washington. I knew him. A brilliant attorney." "He was," Jamal nodded. "And while I may not have his degree yet, I inherited his library, his case notes, and his belief that justice matters more than power." Dr. Rivera stood again. "Your Honor, if I may add, Jamal Washington has scored in the 99.9th percentile on law school aptitude tests. He's been accepted early to Harvard Law School with a full scholarship. His legal reasoning abilities are, frankly, extraordinary." Judge Harmon studied Jamal with new understanding. "Mr. Wilson, do you have any response to the evidence and arguments presented?" Wilson, now sweating visibly, conferred frantically with his team. Finally, he straightened. "Your Honor, in light of new information, my client would like to propose a settlement." "I thought he might," Jamal replied calmly. "I've prepared terms that would be acceptable to the tenants." He presented a document outlining proper notice periods, substantial relocation assistance, guaranteed right of return at controlled rates, and penalties for the fraudulent condemnation attempt. Judge Harmon reviewed the terms and looked up. "These seem reasonable given the circumstances." "Mr. Wilson?" After a tense phone conversation with Donovan, Wilson reluctantly agreed to the settlement. "Very well," Judge Harmon declared. "The settlement is approved and will be entered as a binding order of this court." She fixed Wilson with a stern look. "Additionally, I am referring this matter to the Bar Association's Ethics Committee for review of potential misconduct." As the courtroom erupted in cheers from the West Side Heights residents, Judge Harmon addressed Jamal directly. "Mr. Washington, in my 30 years on the bench, I've rarely seen such impressive advocacy from attorneys of any age. Your father would be proud." 3 months later, the residents of West Side Heights received their relocation assistance checks. Renovations proceeded on the building, but with the guarantee that all families could return at their previous rent levels. Diana Washington was not only reinstated at Memorial Hospital, but promoted to the supervisor position, after the hospital board underwent significant changes in leadership following a public scandal. Jamal received early admission offers from every top law school in the country. News outlets covered the story of the teenage legal prodigy who had taken on a powerful developer and won. On his last day before leaving for Harvard, Jamal visited Mrs. Parker to help her with one final bit of paperwork. "You know what the best part of all this was?" the elderly woman asked, her eyes twinkling. "What's that?" Jamal smiled. The look on that fancy lawyer's face when he realized he'd been outsmarted by someone he thought was just a kid. Maybe next time, he'll learn not to judge a book by its cover. Jamal laughed. Or a lawyer by his age. As he walked home through the neighborhood that had shaped him, Jamal reflected on how quickly everything had changed. But one thing remained constant: his belief that justice was possible, even against the most powerful opponents, if you refused to be underestimated. Sometimes, being dismissed as just a kid was the greatest advantage of all. The true lesson of Jamal Washington's story isn't just about a brilliant young man who outsmarted arrogant attorneys. It's about the danger of judging others based on appearance, age, or background. Every day, Extraordinary talents go unrecognized because we see only what we expect to see, not what truly stands before us. The powerful tried to silence Jamal because they couldn't imagine a world where a black teenager from a low-income neighborhood could challenge their authority. But intelligence, determination, and justice don't belong exclusively to those with wealth and privilege. They belong to anyone brave enough to stand up and fight, regardless of how the world tries to define them. Remember Jamal's story the next time you're tempted to underestimate someone, for the greatest minds and strongest hearts often come in packages the world too quickly dismisses. If this story moved you, please give it a like and consider subscribing. We tell these stories to shine light on truth and hope, and your support helps keep them coming. What did you feel about this journey? Have you or someone you love experienced something similar? Share your thoughts or your own stories in the comments. Your voice matters in our community. Thank you for joining us on this journey of resilience and justice. See you in the next video.